Hey, John. Mr. Welbourn, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Fantastic.
Well, we have another episode of Power Athlete Radio, so let's get right into it. We got some questions to answer.
We do.
Coming from the hotline.
That's right. And all about training today, our bread and butter. And should we just get down to business?
Dude, let's just jam it in there.
Okay.
Just jam it in there.
All right, this caller's coming out from the shadows. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank God there was that beep. I almost fell asleep. So, I'm a long-time listener, zero-time contributor, and even longer-time trainer. So, big question. We got the shadow thing coming up on Jack Street. Looks awesome. Big fan of both those guys. My name's Spud, by the way. So, question. I was doing my rack pulls right before my shadow set. I did my last prep set, and my shadow set I was looking to hit 12. I did 10 on my prep set at 405. My shadow set was 425. My shadow set, I only got 3. What the hell did I do wrong? Can you help me warm up? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Spud, for calling in with that question.
Thanks, Spuds. There's a lot of questions to unpack within that one.
Oh, we're going to unpack some stuff today, huh?
Yes. Okay. I would like to start with, he name dropped those guys.
Yeah, so I'll give a little background. We have our straight-up hypertrophy bodybuilding, to quote Zach Evanesh, old school bodybuilding program called Jack Street, which is by far one of our most successful teams on Train Heroic. It usually involves something that I'm working on and, more importantly, things that we're testing. If your goal is to pack on as much muscle as humanly possible, sans performance-enhancing drugs, Jack Street is by far, I think, the most potent program I've seen. As I was designing this next cycle, I went back and I started looking at some of my old training logs from a bunch of years ago, and there was always one max rep set. So Mike Metzner, if you guys are familiar with that name, you can go and Google him, had one of the most impressive physiques, trained with Arnold, and Metzner had this idea that, the body was a lot like dynamite. You got to hit it hard, one time. To get a big explosion. And so he did like one set to failure. They would warm up and then just one balls to the wall set. Dorian Yates came along, and those of you guys that have seen, Yates' Blood and Guts, if you haven't, go see it. And, Yates used the same deal. And I saw an interesting comment once. This is years ago. They asked him, like, hey, Arnold and these guys did these 3-hour training marathon sessions. Why did you not feel that you needed to train like that? And he said they use lifting weights to get in shape. I'm using lifting weights to put on muscle. And then he used a bunch of, aerobic conditioning to stay in shape. So with that said, if you go see Blood and Guts, you'll see Yates handle some insane poundages, like, 585 pounds for bent over rows. I mean, dude's just an absolute savage training in this like little dungeon of a gym in the UK. So as I was designing this next training cycle, I named it the Shadow because monsters lurk in the shadows, and that's what we're looking to create. We're looking to create some monsters. But the 2-week acclimation phase that the program is starting out with is designed to do exactly what Spud is asking about. I'm giving a 10 rep set and then a second set that is max reps. So it's not like you just walk in the gym, pick up a weight and do it for max reps. No. There's a whole bunch of warm up in there. So like, for example, on his rack pulls, he probably should have done 135 for 10, 225 for 8 to 10, 315 for 6 to 7 reps, and then pyramided up 365 for, 4 or 5. So we're getting all this volume on the front side. And then he's going to hit his heavy 10. He pulls 405. The problem that he ran into is he totally shot his wad. He went all out and probably...
On his 10.
On his 10. The 10 was way too heavy. And... so then he's able to get 10, and I don't know how easy it was if he was struggling or straining. Then he throws on straps, throws on another 20 pounds, and all of a sudden he gets 3. So that's a good learning experience, because then he's going to understand the next time this comes up that is it better for him to try to do 425 for a triple, or maybe handle 405 again for his max reps. So he should have done 405 for 10. Rested 3 to 5 minutes. When he felt ready, go 405 again, and then see how many max reps he can get. Mm-hmm. So it was interesting as I was going through the first week of Shadow, just the first couple days. It was pretty interesting how people were like hitting their 10, on like a back squat, for example, and then using the same weight and coming back and getting like 14, 15, 16 reps. So all that shows them is that if they're able to get more reps at that 10, then they probably just got to add more weight and they just got to be a little smarter with how they get up. But the reason I've designed it with this acclimation phase is there's a lot of teaching to help people kind of auto-regulate and understand what numbers they need to hit.
Yes, and that's the beauty of it. And what I liked is video. We're getting tagged in videos, and we're not only seeing how they executed through the Train Heroic training programs, we're watching them move to say, hey, those are some quality reps, or hey, we can provide feedback as coaches. You got a little bit heavy more. Yeah,
the other issue when you're training to failure, there's a couple things you need. One, you need some training partners, ideally, to really go to failure. If you're training by yourself in the garage gym, hopefully you got some bumper plates and you can ditch and get out from underneath a back squat. But it's difficult to really go to failure, especially on a back squat, unless you got some good training partners. And if you don't, get some bumper plates and just worry about saving your own life. A lot of the movements that a lot of bodybuilders, especially Yates, would use for max reps to failure, were done with machines. So, I mean, RDLs were done with a barbell, but you can drop those pretty easy. But like, heavy incline chest press, legs, or a leg press, and a bunch of other machines, because they can really go to failure and hammer the muscle when you start using machines like that. So it's kind of a different stimulus. I mean, most people that are following Jack Street in our training programs are doing so in, a garage gym setting, some situation where, they ordered a bunch of equipment. It's in the garage. A lot of people are training in CrossFit gyms or, local boxes. And, a select few are probably training actually in global gyms.
Oh, this I'm having flashbacks to the first 22 Jack Street cycle. Yeah. That was my first bodybuilding experience. And as it was written, we had to join the Globo gym. And you've told us many stories of the 12 and those interesting experiences of watching the trainers go. But then when we saw Jack Street come to life through Train Heroic, our target demographic, the garage gym solo trainer, and we saw this metamorphosis of bodybuilding for the garage gym. And that could have been the first one, the program style like that, at least that I've seen.
Yeah. There's an interesting, I guess you could say, balance. I believe that to really build a powerful physique, you got to be able to lift free weights. But when it comes down to just being able to drive as much, damage and just trauma into a muscle, there are machines that can do that really well, especially with force reps and bands. And that's why you see a lot of these guys like, pro bodybuilders will, use Smith machines. And people are like, I can't believe they're using a Smith machine on the squat. Well, they're not necessarily worried about stability. All they're looking to do is get into a position that they can just hammer that muscle into oblivion.
Now, take us to inside the athlete. What are these bodybuilders thinking about? Because you've trained with professional bodybuilders.
Yep.
What are they thinking about when going to failure, whether it's free weight or a machine?
Well, you have to remember bodybuilding is not weightlifting. So, those guys...
Good one-liner.
Yeah, I mean, those guys aren't standing on stage having to do a one-arm bench press before they get up and then pose. I mean, they're trying to put together the most impressive physique they can. It just so happens that heavy poundages usually result in the most dense appearing muscle. But a big part of that comes down to, can they diet? Can they get as lean as possible to be able to show everything off and have a balanced physique? I think for the guys that I saw that were really, really pretty impressive, they handled, ton of heavy poundages in their compound movements, and then used a ton of accessory movements with machines and other ways to attack it. And they were constantly looking for different variations. It was interesting. I used to train with these two pros when I was in high school at Gold's Gym, and these dudes must have had 100 different ways to attack rear delts. It was hilarious. Like, they'd show up and they're like, hey, we got a new variation. I mean, just the creativity and variations. I don't know if they were all different or how it necessarily worked, but they thought that, these different variations of different rows and flies and position, up and down, here. I mean, they had a million different variations for stuff. So I think all too often in the strength game, we just, hey, this is the variation, or this is how it's done, and we don't necessarily think on variations. Like the other day we had, I say it was in Grindstone, I had the bilateral heel elevated back squats, and this guy, asked the question, why are we doing these? And I'm like, more challenging variation. Was your squat better or worse? And being able to throw enough variation at people to where it's interesting and continues to drive adaptation is always the interesting trick in the balancing act with all these programs.
Oh, big time. And coordination. It's almost a test for us when we introduce new variations of a movement. How is our program working? Because if we're doing it properly and we're reverse engineering from the definition of athleticism for many of these programs and goals, if we can throw new variations, if they're executing them well, we're doing our job.
Yeah, there's so many variables and so many things to tweak. One of the guys on Hammer Cell, all of his sprints, all of his hundreds, 150s, 200s, he's PRing all of his sprint work. And he said his squat's getting weaker. And my thing is like, what do you need? Do you need a stronger squat, or is it more important to be fast? So I think there's an interesting balancing act. And for a guy like him, if he can't recover with the sprint volume, we probably just have to cut the sprint volume and then see if that affects his back squat. So this is another interesting challenge with our programs, is we're writing these customized generalist programs, which is kind of an oxymoron in a lot of ways, but we're writing these super in-depth team training programs for a very targeted audience, of a very real demographic. And they're kind of generalists in a lot of ways, in that even though we have a window into the training through Instagram, and the team feeds on the different programs on Train Heroic, all the comments and everything, and even friends of ours that are doing the program, we can get a deep glimpse into how it's all progressing. But the issue comes down to, we're not seeing these people train daily. It's not like we have, the 1,000+ people following Jack Street show up here to Power Athlete, and and they're banging weights with us. And, all of a sudden, hey, your squat's not good. Why? Well, you are, having issues within your hips. Like there's a million different things that we can assess in real time. But if we're not in that training environment when it's happening, it becomes very difficult.
Mm-hmm. But that becomes the power of your knowledge and experience, because we're reverse engineering from specific goals and taking advanced training techniques from powerful guys like Metzner and Yates, but then knowing your audience. So tweaking it so they can apply it for their specific situation, which a lot of folks is training solo.
Well, the other one is I think a lot of people, and especially when you start training with people, and I saw this when when I was in the NFL, and obviously after my NFL, when we were at CrossFit Balboa, even at Power Athlete, a lot of people had never really ever trained to failure.
Ooh, yeah.
So that was a huge one. We'd get underneath and be like, hey, we're going to do max reps. And all of a sudden they put the weight away. I'm like, I think you had a few more in you, I remember we did a linear progression to 20 rep squats. So my goal was to get 405 for 20 reps. So we started at 315, we added 10, and it was just like every week, like one day a week. That's all it was. It was just going for this max rep 20 rep set, max weight 20 rep set. So we would do this linear progression of 20 rep sets. We started at 315, added 10, and then it was like 325, 335. I get up to like 405, and I basically hadn't missed a rep up until I got to 405. I got to 18, and I'm pretty sure I blacked out on the way down because I fell forward and the weight went into the stands. And
who was your spotter, Nate?
No, I don't know who was with me. But it was one of those things where somehow I survived it. And, we had bumper plates. I was pretty good at getting rid of the weight, but I definitely remember like that was a legitimate 20 rep set. Now, it would have been nice if I had spotters, because then they probably could have done a couple force reps. But it just becomes too difficult with doing a back squat.
Mm-hmm. But you drove some adaptation, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Let's expand on shadow. We have 2-week accumulation phase. Then what can we anticipate as a Jack Street user?
This first 2 weeks is going to hopefully teach people enough about themselves to when they get to the actual program, they'll understand what that final rep set is. So I'll shoot out and say, hey, this is how many reps I want you to get. This is what my warm-up will look like, and then be able to get them in. And then what'll happen after they get to that piece and we actually really hit true max rep sets, then we'll start getting into like some rest pauses. We'll get into some drop sets, and we'll start getting more and more creative. But that only works is if we can really just take that hammer and hit it as hard as we can. So I think, we've talked about this for years. It's easier to recover from intensity than it is for volume. And whenever you think about volume and whenever you think about a lot of training, it's just more and more and more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, look at all these programs. It's just more. People just stack it on like a Christmas tree, just keep hanging ornaments. And to be able to kind of take it back a step and be able to focus on intensity is going to be kind of nice. And I'm interested to see what the gains people make are.
Well, for our listeners that haven't been enveloped in the power athlete methodology where we have a specific approach and definition to intensity, how would you prepare that? Is it the emotional intensity after a 40-minute AMRAP?
Oh. Well, when we talk about intensity, we talk about percentage of 1RM. You know, like how, like what's the heaviest weight I can handle? You know, to me, if I'm going to do, you know, a 10 rep set and it's somewhere at, you know, 85, 87.5%, 90%, that's pretty impressive to me. And I think a lot of people aren't used to getting outside that comfort zone. So I'm excited to throw this training at them just because we've, you know, historically for the last couple cycles on Jack Street, it's just been a ton of volume. It's been like a ton of volume. I mean, obviously we have our compound movements. It's like 2 or 3 different bouts of accessory. So to actually come in and have some stuff like this is going to be pretty exciting. I'm really excited to see the gains people make.
Oh, yeah. And testing that volume. So now they put on the structure. We get that opportunity to coordinate it and present them the opportunity to really dial it in and express their strength.
Yep.
All right. So the Shadow, powerathletehq.com/Jack Street.
Just slash Jack Street.
Just slash?
Yeah. And if you guys are listening to this and you want to jump into the Shadow, do it.
Yeah. 7-day free trial. Then immerse yourself in the community. Say hello. Throw up some lifting videos. And then be sure to tag us.
Sounds good. See you over there.
I'm going back. I'm a loaded freight train and I'm right on track. I'm